We have time for a few questions.
Of course, right? This is going to maybe kind of be a stream of thought. So it seems like there's kind of a disconnect between individualism and the idea of in God we trust and God bless America. And doesn't religion, generally, regardless of the religion, kind of bridge that individualism versus communalism in terms of caring about something bigger than yourself? I mean, we may have a richer, I'm biased, but we may have a richer tradition that brings us together, but doesn't all religion kind of supposed to be doing that on some level?
Yeah, I'm certainly not arguing here that Judaism is the only religion that does this. I'm arguing against the idea that we define our individuality just in terms of being able to make any choice we want, which I think is the American neutral. Like, that's the fallback in the pub. I'm not hurting you, so I get to do whatever. And I think that leads to a lot of loneliness. And it leads to a lot of bad choices that get harder to correct with the passage of time. And I think that Judaism has a track record of helping us make better choices. That's all I was arguing.
Yeah, exactly, but it just feels like you're right about the loneliness, and it's don't quite get why we can't bridge communities of people of...
Oh, okay. So look, I think we can bridge multiple communities. Look, Judaism itself, in its teaching that God isn't just God of the Jews, God is the God of all human beings, right? God's glory fills the whole earth. Judaism shows that you don't have to choose between particularism and universality. That they are both Jewish values, right? I love you because you're mishpacha, right? But that doesn't mean I don't love the non-Jew too. I just also know who's family and who's closer and who's not as close, right? And in fact, the way Judaism teaches us to love all people is by teaching us to love our fellow Jews first. That's how we learn how to love other people.
Yeah, I was talking about other religions, not us, because we already believe that, exactly.
Well, but other religions like ours can be lived in ways that are deepening and enhance humanity, and they can be lived in ways that are narrow and brutal, right? There are Jews made more noble by their Judaism, and Jews who are made more judgmental and rigid by their Judaism. That's true for Christians, Buddhists, Hindus, Muslims. Like, anyone can use anything to become rotten if they want.
With the freedoms that you mentioned in your first part of your speech, what about the freedom of press? Without the freedom of press, it would limit the other freedoms that you try to maintain.
So I want to go on record here as being officially in favor of freedom of the press.
Without that, you do not have the other freedoms that you're trying to attain.
I just said I'm in favor of it.
But today's government.
If you think I'm going to walk into Sinai Temple and talk about today's government, you don't know me. I have gone into this lion's den and I have emerged many times, brother.
Thank you, Rabbi. It was a terrific talk. I don't see my identity as an American in contradistinction to my identity as a Jew, but as two parts that fit together that make me more complete as a person. On the American side, as you said, it's a rights-based identity. A right to be left alone, a right to speak what I want, a right to practice my religion. It's based upon my rights as an individual. On the Jewish side, it's more my communal duties. Not just communal, but my duties. My duty to love God, duty to honor my parents, duty to be kind to the stranger, duty to contribute to charity, duty to love God, etc. And when I put together my American rights and my Jewish communal duties and obligations, I consider myself really privileged to be more of an integrated whole person.
I consider you to be an integrated whole person too. And I'm still in favor of freedom of the press.
Without that, it's
Without which he would not be an integrated whole individual. But here's what I want to, the place where I don't want to be so safe. I think there was a time in which we were so insecure in this country that we had to say to the world and convince ourselves that there's no conflict between being a good American and being a good Jew. And on one level, I think that's true, but I want to take a risk. I want to say there are places where American culture and Jewish culture differ. They differ substantively. And in those places, I think what we want to encourage is not one side to back off, but to have a conversation. America is made better when it's in dialogue with its participating cultures. And American culture changes over time. But I think there are times where Judaism offers a very different take on the world than the American culture it encounters. Right? And we've already changed American culture in remarkable ways, right? The American culture we're now talking about isn't the same American culture as 1952, right? So there's already been an ongoing shift. These are dynamic things, but I wonder whether it's possible to say, I am also very proudly American and Jewish, and part of what I'm proud of is the way those two civilizations can duke it out within me. Sometimes I modify my Judaism because I think America got it right. Women rabbis did not come from ritually observant, traditional practicing people. It came from American Jews taking a look at feminism and saying, that's a good idea. Right? And I think we would all agree at Sinai Temple, thank God for women rabbis. You have some excellent women rabbis in this very building. Right? So there are times where our Judaism benefits from an American critique. And sometimes America benefits by a Jewish or a religious critique. Right? And I think that in areas of human dignity, in areas of fighting for a lack of moral equivalency, being able to label something as good or evil, being convinced that we need to actually fight against evil, I think Judaism has what to do to contribute to an American kind of laissez-faire, right? And in that sense, there's a conflict. I'm okay with the conflict. I don't need my Judaism and my Americanism to fit exactly together, because here's the challenge. If Americanism and Judaism teach all the same things, then who needs Judaism? Right? And so what I want to say to my kids is, actually, America leaves an open space that only religion can fill. Right? I'll go back to what I quoted before. We hold these rights to be self-evident, that all men have the right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Nowhere does it define what the pursuit of happiness entails. I believe that's because the founding fathers meant for religion to define what happiness means, real happiness. And then without that content, then America just becomes a kind of marathon shopping expedition. And that's not America at its best, but it needs religion to critique it. Is there a mic somewhere in the room?
I don't need a mic.
That's true.
So it works because right now Israel and the United States and for the length of our lives have always been
Of one mind or allies, but it's always been a hypothetical, if that were not the case, would I be Jewish first or American first? This is always something we've had this conversation with my family, and we don't all agree. Like, I would be Jewish first and my parents would be American first. So hopefully we never have to come to that in our lifetime or in any lifetime, but it is within the realm of political possibility that there will come a day.
Look, I can't weigh in on if the two countries went to war, what would I do? Because that's a nightmare of such cataclysmic proportions that I can't even enter it. I think that we Jews who love America and Israel need to constantly work to make sure that the two societies are in conversation and in friendship all the time. And that's never something to take for granted. So we need to work to make sure that Israel understands America and American Jews. We need to work to make sure that America gets Israel and Israeli challenges and opportunities. And ultimately, patriotism in either place is defined not by giving the government a blank check. It's by holding each society accountable to its own best values. Right? And if we do that, then they won't come to conflict. I mean, they'll argue. Israel and America will always argue, but it won't come to that kind of a split. This in the front here.
You have been so brilliant and so outstandingly inspiring that I had found no reason to contradict you even for a moment. And there was, though, a moment when I was jealous for how you loved and blessed your children, and my children did not have this great advantage. That's the only thing that pained me within the evening. And I want to wish you continuous success and to elevate our people to the degree you had elevated us tonight.
I have a couple things to say to you. The first is, you give really good blessings. I happen to have an opening in rabbinical school. You should think about it. Second thing I want to say to you and to us, I also say to my son, which is we can't change the past. All we can do is change the future. So one of the things I get from Judaism is the story isn't over, ever. So you keep shining love out in the world, and you have no idea where it will land. That's what we all need to do, is just keep putting the love out there again and again and again. And the second thing I will tell you is that one of the miracles of life is that the things that we got wrong in the relationships in our past, we have a chance to try again on the other side. So with my son Jacob, I have forged a very different father-son relationship than I grew up with. My dad and I are now very close, but we had some challenges back in the day. But with my son, I worked it out differently. So there are plenty of people who are ready to receive your love, and you should work out some of the kinks in the old relationships with some new ones.
Last question here.
First off, I want to say how I was really touched by your talk. But you began talking about weird, meaning Western, Judaism in Western societies. I know that you're involved with Judaism in Germany. Now in Germany, unlike here, and this is true also I think of France and to a lesser degree in Britain, government plays a role in Judaism. Here we can decide to be any kind of Jew we want to be. But in Germany, if you want to be an identified Jew, you owe a tax. And I believe that the rabbis are civil servants.
Yes.
How do you reconcile that with all of the wonderful things that you said?
Okay, so it is true that I am not only the dean of the Ziegler Rabbinical School in Los Angeles, I am also the dean of the Zacharias Frankel College in Potsdam, which is a major city outside of Berlin. And that in June, we will have the first conservative ordination of a new rabbi in Germany since the Shoah, which is amazing.
Wow.
And it is true that the school was not paid for by American fundraising. it was paid for by a check from the German government. Not because they're paying for Jewish education, but because they pay for all graduate schools. And not just rabbis, but professors are civil servants. And professors advance when the Minister of Education decides they should. So there is a level of government intrusion in Europe that Americans would be very uncomfortable with. And it took me a long time to figure out the European system because it's very different than in North America. That having been said, I don't think I need to weigh in on that. Right? In other words, it's not my place to tell the German Jewish community how they should organize themselves. I was brought in to help them train their own leadership, and they'll figure it out. I'm much more comfortable with the American system, but I grew up with this system. So I know my way around here, and I know how to work. There are disadvantages too. You know, rabbis in Europe get their salaries paid by the government. Right? In America, if you don't find people to pay your salaries, you starve to death, or you speak to men's clubs, or whatever. Right? So there are benefits to the European system too, and the price you pay for that is the government is looking in your stuff much more authoritatively than in the United States. Each has strengths and drawbacks. I'm not going to weigh in as to who's right or who's wrong. I will invite anybody who wants to come to Germany for an amazing ordination ceremony. It'll be in mid-June. It's going to be extraordinary. We're going to have a Shabbat celebration at the large gold domed synagogue in downtown Berlin. It should be really a remarkable weekend and an amazing celebration. And then I'll just tell you guys, I was invited to speak in Luxembourg immediately afterward. So the way Brad Artson tours glamorous capitals is I will fly in, and then I'll get to see the inside of a social hall of a Jewish communal building, and I'll get to see the city from the taxi to the airport, and from the airport I'll let you know how Luxembourg turns out. Thanks everybody.
Thank you very much.